welcome to my podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Maryann Roefaro, your host, Transitions of Hope, kind of following along in the book that I wrote. And of course, if you want to communicate with me, it's P.O. Box 2, Camillus, New York, 13031. And I read 3 letters that I received in my previous podcast, and one of them from Jane K., I believe it was, had asked me to talk a little bit more about the Essene traditions and some of their philosophies, and I'm going to do that. But before I do that, I want to say a few things. And what I want to say is that the Essenes are a group that there is controversy around because obviously people weren't really around 2,000 years ago to say exactly what the situation was. And so as people would do, they debate and they argue, and people don't believe what's not in the traditional lane and all of that other kind of stuff. But what I want you to think about when I read this, and I typed this up because I was completely inspired to share this information with you. But what I want to remind you is that having people not agree with things and not be open-minded to thoughts that differ from their own is nothing new. It's been around forever. And if you think about something as crazy as the Inquisitions from 1184 to 1834, it's a lot of years where people were murdered and communities were annihilated and eliminated because they didn't believe what the leaders wanted them to believe. And there was something like 3,000 to 10,000 people who were killed during the Inquisitions. It was an ugly time. However, the Roman Catholic faith is actually responsible back then, those people, for the Inquisitions. It actually, I think it started by Pope Lucius or something, so it was a pope. A little torqued off if people didn't agree exactly with the church. And another thing to remember, too, is, biblically speaking, the groups that decided what to put in the Bible were all Roman. And the Roman Empire was a very mean, ugly place for a long, long time. But see, people don't really do homework and they don't explore. They may get their information from Hollywood or from, whatever. And that's totally okay. Follow your heart. But what I'm saying is it's a great thing to be curious and to have an open mind. But it's nothing new that people want to squelch the voice of someone who doesn't agree with them. Remember Galileo in 1633, he tried to tell the people that it wasn't the earth that revolved around everything, and that the earth and the other planets revolved around the sun. And so he was imprisoned and he was almost murdered for that, he and Copernicus. But yet we know that is true. However, back then, nobody wanted to change the paradigm that existed. Nobody wanted to alter what their writings said. The world was the center of everything. But it wasn't, and so now we know. And something as recent as March of 2009, I had a Reiki and hypnotherapy practice for 10 years. I would do on 2 evenings a week when I was a little bit younger and had enough energy to be a CEO by day and to do these in the evening. And I was kind of amazed, and I talk about this in my book, that in 2009 there were some people, cancer patients, who would not have a Reiki treatment because it was against their religion. And I had asked, what religion are they talking about? And I couldn't believe that it was the Catholic faith. And in March of 2009, there was a U.S. conference of Catholic bishops. They got together and they wrote a document of how Reiki should not be done in any Catholic hospitals, centers, convention centers, retreat centers, anything like that. And they cited things like the lack of universal life force, how nothing was based in science, how it was a no man's land, and how it was dangerous. And unfortunately, a lot of people took that letter and then they went, no, can't do Reiki, it's against the Catholic faith. And, the sad thing is first of all, I could speak on it for an hour on the scientific basis of integrative therapy, such as Reiki. Suffice to say that anytime an electric current flows through living tissue, this is Ampere's law. It's a law in physics. It's very, very old, hundreds and hundreds of years old. It creates an electromagnetic field. And we are beings of electricity, and we are beings of electromagnetic energy. And there is not one group of people who have, it over somebody else to be able to work with that energy. And it's all people healing themselves anyways. But I just want to throw out there when I read this that, yeah, there's controversy. There's controversy. This is an excerpt. It's stuff from the teachings of the Essenes from Enoch to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's written by Edmund Sickley. And, he was a linguist, and he said that he explored these documents and he converted them from various languages, and people say, well, that he didn't really do that, and they didn't really let him in the Vatican, and no, he never had those documents. So that's going to always happen. But nonetheless, what I find extremely interesting for me is that this coincides so much with all the things I wrote in my book. However, it wasn't until months and months after my book was already published that I even landed on all of this. So, like my life has been, I get led to things, to read things, to talk about things, to do things. And that's really why I'm here doing these podcasts. When people say, how many book sales do you have? I got to be honest with you, I have no idea. I don't know how many of you out there listen on all these different platforms. What I know is that I'm supposed to be doing this. And I know that if I'm supposed to continue to do it, then I will. And that's about all I know. I do this. In case you were wondering, I do it truly to try to make the world a better place, because there are so many people out there struggling. And spiritual awareness, spiritual relationship with, the love that we have for ourselves and our Creator is really about the only thing that's going to get us through everything. In business, there's a saying, it says that things happen at the speed of trust. And that's really quite relevant when you're trying to create any new business adventure or have any kind of partnership or strategic initiative. There has to be trust. So I will say that soul evolution and our, I don't want to say enlightenment, but our ascension to a higher level of vibration, okay, well, that's completely dependent in the speed by which it will be about trust, but not trust with anybody other than ourselves. It's trusting our instincts. It's knowing that we have answers within us, knowing that we have every tool we need to traverse this crazy world. Those are the truths that we know. Remember when I said that nothing real can be threatened? Think about that. What are the things that can't be threatened? So I just ask you to keep an open mind as I read this. Surrender to what you know to be true. Be curious. And really stop struggling to be what somebody else wants you to be and to think the way somebody else wants you to think. Whenever those things that we talked about where they tried to squelch something, it was always fear. Fear that whatever was the status quo wouldn't be needed anymore. I will tell you that the journey of Reiki and of energy work and self-healing is an incredible journey within. And sometimes we learn that we can access all the intermediaries we need within us, and so we don't rely as much on external resources. And that's a fear for some groups of individuals. So be curious and maintain an open mind, and please listen while I read this for you. Okay. So, if you want to know more, it's the teachings of the Essenes from Enoch to the Dead Sea Scrolls by Edmund Sickley. And also there's a little bit of Edgar Cayce on the mysterious Essenes in here. And you'll remember he was that sleeping prophet who used to say all sorts of things while he was in a trance. So, if we have some familiarity with the Essenes, when we hear their name, we usually think of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've talked about the Dead Sea Scrolls before, found in Qumran. That's, at the time it was the West Bank of Jordan. Anyways, they were found between 1947 and 1956 in the caves. They were from the 3rd and 2nd century BCE, so before the Common Era, before Christ. And they actually contain the oldest existing Hebrew Bible fragments. So the Dead Sea Scrolls came from an area where the Essenes used to live. Although the thought is that a lot of the parchments and the documents that they protected and hid away that weren't found till 1947 were written by various spiritual leaders. So when Sicily speaks about the Essenes he's referring to, and that's really what I'm writing about, he's actually referring to two specific communities because the Dead Sea Scrolls weren't even discovered yet when Sicily had written all of this stuff and when he found all these documents that he interpreted himself. He, took it from one language into another. And I find that it's interesting that one was in Egypt, living in Alexandria, and the other was living in Mount Carmel, which is former kingdom of Israel. But the Essenes of Mount Carmel were Nazarenes. And so maybe you're familiar of hearing who the famous Nazarene was. So they belonged to the school of prophets, and they called themselves, okay, so remember now, this is well before the Common Era. They called themselves sons of God. So perhaps you've heard something about Son of God, Nazarenes. So do know that they're considered quite the spiritual leaders in the growth and development of the way. So remember, they were an ancient group of spiritual leaders long before Jesus was born. They were different than the Essenes living in Qumran. Qumran was more of a commune. There were individuality opportunities, but it was all together. There was a lot of eating and dining and religious experiences that were all done together. There was, I think a lot of the men were celibate. There were some families there and children because they did find graves that had women and children in them. But for the most part, it was more like a commune. And this is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. But Qumran, the place where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, it was a more dogmatic community, and it differed really from those in Egypt and Israel. So the Essenes of which Sicily interpreted the writings, they were different. Okay, they didn't live in celibacy, and women were actually seen as equals. And what I find very interesting is that I have read in the past several accounts from people who in trance, Trance, lived at the time of, before Jesus, lived in the time of the Essenes, and it's amazing to me that young people who were put in these trance who went back had no idea who the Essenes were, how any of it worked, and have given incredible accounts that are consistent with some of the things that I have found recently. Okay, so women were seen as equal. And the main branch of the Essenes and the elders and teachers were from the Nazarenes. They were known for their wisdom, their healing, and their teaching the way of love and enlightenment from the inside out, which I don't even know if I made that up. I mean, it was from the inside out. I find that just fascinating. They felt that underscoring current knowledge was not as meaningful as expanding knowledge and wisdom. It was written that Mary and Joseph fled with the infant Jesus to the Essenes in Egypt to escape the murder of the children. And it's written that Jesus, as an adult, spent a lot of time in study and preparation for his future with the Essenes. So we have talked about everything in life. There's always got to be controversy and opinions. And we know that any time the status quo is questioned, there's always issues. And people revolt. Sometimes very quietly and sometimes quite extreme. So we look back at history, and I talked about this, Galileo and Copernicus and the Inquisitions and all that, and we just see all of that. So Sicily said he translated these ancient documents that were found in the Vatican and other places. He said some were written in Aramaic or Sumerian, Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Sanskrit. He was a Hungarian linguist, philosopher, and psychologist. And he is a controversial figure. Because people think that, well, this is all fake, this is all his own stuff. And I would just say to you, be curious, draw your own conclusions, do your own research, and ask for discernment. Also, it was interesting, I found that when the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce began giving a trance state discourse about a soul group called the Essenes, he explained how they played a major role in the spiritual journey of mankind. And what I found really fascinating, that except for a few scholars and ancient history buffs, nobody on the planet had heard of the Essenes, including Edgar Cayce. And here's another little funny tidbit. The Dead Sea Scrolls weren't discovered until 2 years after Edgar Cayce died. So here in trance, he's talking all about and educating people on this group of spiritual leaders. And there is documentation that the Essenes lived and some of this stuff because there's scribes that are well known and respected, I guess, by those people who do this kind of thing. Flavius, Josephus, Philo, Pliny the Elder, you may have heard of him. Well-known historians. And sometimes they call the Essenes the Nazarenes, which is kind of interesting since they originally came from Nazareth. And I just remind you that there's that other famous soul that's also called a Nazarene who changed the world, right? Okay, Yeshua ben Joseph or Jesus. So the teachings of the Essenes can't occur without mentioning Moses. So Moses, during the second period of his life, he spent 40 years in the desert following a path of nature and studying everything that was around him. So, many other great geniuses and prophets, including Jesus, spent a great deal of time in huge vastness of the desert with their solitude and silence, really searching for those inner truths. So this is really when Moses discovered the one law. And if you caught my podcast before, we talked about how everything goes amok when the law is not followed. And I said I would explain what the one law is in this podcast. Well, he discovered this one law, the totality of all laws. He found that this one law governed all manifestations of life and the whole universe. And he referred to the totality as the law, spelled with a capital L. So he observed that man lives in a dynamic, constantly changing universe. He saw that the law manifests in perpetual change, and that behind the change is a plan of cosmic order on a vast scale. He came to understand that the law is the greatest and only power in the universe, and that all other laws and all things are part of this one law. The law is subject to no other laws. It's eternal, indestructible, incapable of defeat. A plant, a tree, a human body, or a solar system, each has its own laws, mathematical, biological, and astronomical, but the one supreme power, the law, is behind it all. So the law governs all that takes place in the universe, all activity, all creation. And the Essenes called the sum total of all life, of all planets. I find it interesting that they included life on all planets and the universe, the cosmic ocean of life. They believed that every human being is an individualized part of the unity. This unity is the law, the eternal light of which Moses spoke. So Moses saw the law broken everywhere. And this is another reason to just contemplate that nothing real can be threatened. And the law is real. And it became evident to Moses that everything created as a result of the deviation from the law destroys itself and in time will disappear. So only the law is eternal. So Moses spent the third period of his life, after his desert time. He was determined to dedicate his remaining days to the realization and application of the law, trying to bring mankind into harmony with it. So the Essenes taught that if a man thinks in harmony with the law, he can remedy whatever inharmony he has created in the past. He can recreate his thinking body, his feeling body, his acting body, healing all and creating complete harmony with the environment and the world. But if thoughts and actions are not in accord with the law, then nothing else can create harmony in an individual's world. And these deviations create all the imperfections in this world, the limitations and any negative ramifications in well-being, environment, society, and the planet. And nothing's really different than Moses' day. We're still, for all this evolution that we have and all the technological advancements, we still have all sorts of challenges within our planet Earth. So the Essenes knew that it takes many generations to affect changes in people or in mankind as a whole. And so they sent out teachers and healers from their brotherhoods whose lives and accomplishments would manifest the truths that they taught and little by little increase mankind's understanding and desire to live in accord with the law. The Essene Brotherhood sent out such teachers as John the Baptist, Jesus, and John the Beloved. They warned again and again of the consequences of man's social and economic deviations from the law. The mass of mankind failed to listen, but the few more evolved individuals heeded their teachings. So what is the law? The law is love and oneness. The knowing that everyone and everything is connected. The law is our creator, a formless, infinite light, a vibration, the source of unconditional love that flows through every soul and all humanity. It flows through every breath, through every heartbeat. It's the love of which we were made, the one infinite and deepest universal truth. The law is everywhere. The law is the God of all religions. All that is concrete or abstract, material or immaterial, visible or invisible, is ruled by the one law. The law is formless, yet it contains all love, all knowledge, and all power. It is humanity's teacher and friend, showing us what we must do, what we must know, and how we must evolve into the being we can someday become. The law guides humanity in every problem, through every obstacle. See, peace with the law means peace and harmony with the cosmic forces of the universe. Through this peace, we make contact with all superior currents and radiations from all the planets in cosmic space. And what is radiation? It's the energy that travels in the form of electromagnetic waves or particles originating from a source. The Essenes had a plethora of advanced knowledge and wisdom, and with all our humanity's accomplishments, the basics continue to escape us. The Essenes also knew we were not alone in the universe. They recognized light beings from other dimensions. So through the law, we're able to attain our realization or our unity with all the forces in the universe, those of Earth, and those from all planets in our solar system and galactic systems. Through this peace, we can become united with all the highest values in the universe. We can awaken our inner intuition, the intuition that was followed by the mystics and the prophets of all ages. Through this peace, we contact our Creator, and this peace completes humanity's evolution and brings total happiness, a forever goal. So we know humanity is part of the totality of this universe. We form an undivided unity with the whole. We think we're separate because we're so aware of our individuality, and we've become very self-conscious and self-centered beyond the point where self-centeredness is really necessary to preserve life. So as in some of the podcasts before, I talked about how the feeling of separation creates lack and limitation within our consciousness, and it causes an infinite complexity of false limitations, false beliefs, false thoughts, self-imposed limitations. It goes on and on. Because in our thoughts, we've separated ourselves from the abundance of this universe, and some of us have shut ourselves off from the source of all that supplies what we need, the material and the immaterial. So the Essenes considered that man lives in the midst of a field of forces, both terrestrial and planetary, and that our individual evolution progresses to the degree in which we cooperate with the forces of nature. The Essenes held that man can take his rightful place in the universe only by absorbing all possible knowledge from the great teachings that have been given forth by masters of wisdom. So, that's kind of what we've been talking about in every podcast, right? It was kind of interesting that I found this book months after my book was written. But if you are open, and if you are loving, and if your intentions are to continue to grow outside what you think you know, then you will. So don't limit yourself by just rearranging the chairs, the deck chairs, the dogma. Explore, look within, meditate. Some people fast. Use some of the methods of enlightenment that the ancients used. And I guess allow your free will, because we all have free will, right? And our co-created plan is co-created. We are the authors of our life, but we could allow our free will to be consistent with the oneness, with the law, with the capital L, with love, through love, with kindness and compassion. So I thank you for being with me. Once again, if you have any comments or you want to contact me, Maryann, P.O. Box 2, Camillus, New York, 13031. I'm very grateful for your support, for the love that you allow me to share with all of you. May every cell in your body vibrate to the highest frequency of love, where perfection exists and where only health and wellness can be sustained. Remember, friends, miracles happen every day. They stand in shining silence next to every dream of pain and suffering. It's the alternative to the dream and the choice of the dreamer. So choose wisely. Choose with your heart, with your soul. Really connect and trust yourself. And help me make the world a better place, one person at a time, from the inside out. Tag, you're it. Thank you so much. Much love.